Welcome to today's complimentary webinar, Understanding Analytics for the Learning Organization. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin Spencer and I'll be your moderator for our session. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you a little about Brandon Hall Group. Brandon Hall Group was established in 1992 and was formerly Brandon Hall Research. As you may know, we are a research and analyst advisor firm. We have nearly 200,000 subscribers to our services and over 10,000 clients globally. Brandon Hall focuses on the areas of learning and development, talent management, leadership development, and executive management. We also specialize in sales effectiveness and marketing impact. We have several offerings for our members, including our Research Member Center, our Knowledge Bases, a Smart Choice certification program, and our Excellence Awards program. I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter is Stacey Harris. Stacey is the Vice President of Research and Advisory Services here at Brandon Hall Group. Our second presenter is Vinay Nilakantan, the Director of Product Development and Research at Meridian. Vinay and his team manage the development of Meridian's flagship product, the Meridian Global LMS, as well as the company's learning management mobile and analytics tools. Vinay also defines the product path and oversees quality assurance for the LMS software maker. I'd like to thank Meridian for sponsoring today's webinar. Meridian provides the industry-leading Meridian Global LMS and an array of supporting professional services custom designed to align to unique client needs. They're the #1 ranked human capital management company for customer loyalty with a documented customer retention rate of 98%. Their solutions empower organizations to optimize their learning technology business processes and drive breakthrough results. Before we begin, I would like to invite you as attendees to take an active role in today's presentation. There will be poll questions throughout today's webinar, as well as a question and answer period near the close of our session. If you wish to ask a question during today's presentation, we would encourage you to do so. You may ask questions by typing in the question box of your control panel. I will be monitoring today's questions and will be providing some of your questions to today's presenters for their feedback as time permits. Also, all attendees will receive a copy of the slides and a recording after this webinar. I'll now turn today's platform over to Brandon Hall Group's Stacey Harris, who will fill us in on today's agenda.
Thanks, Erin. I appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Thanks for everyone calling in this afternoon. We're looking forward to a really great discussion on a really important topic. We've got some wonderful people joining today from all over the world, it looks like. We got quite a few from my neighbors in the north here in Toronto and Canada, Ottawa. Quite a few from my neighbors on the other side in Penn State and Pennsylvania and Chicago and Rochester, New York, and North Carolina, and everybody here is jealous of the person that's in Miami, so thanks for joining today and bringing the sunshine with you. So hopefully everyone else is doing well. We're really excited to get started with the conversation on understanding analytics for the learning organization, and we have a great co-presenter today who's going to be joining us, Vinay, who has just done, I think, some amazing work in this space and been working in it for a very long time, and has really going to be talking about sort of how you think about analytics for the learning organization as a whole, how you think about it within your LMS, and how you think about it from an evolution perspective, because no one wants to jump into analytics without really thinking through their strategy, their process, and the tools that they need to use. And so we're going to be covering all of that today. We are going to be spending a little bit of time defining it because we know there's still a lot of questions in the market about what is quote-unquote learning analytics. We are going to be sharing some context. How is it evolving, and how does it look in your world? We will be doing a couple of case studies today, and we'll be sure to wrap up this afternoon talking about some pitfalls to avoid and how you can sort of get started from a data perspective wherever you're starting in the process for everyone. One of the things I think that's really important to understand before we sort of dive into talking about learning analytics is to understand why learning analytics has become such a hot topic. Particularly, I think it is in the market today that where we were even 5 years ago or last year has changed, and we are becoming, as a market in general, much better at understanding where the technology sits, what it's doing in our organizations, and how it's fitting into our long-term views. Out here, you'll actually get the data tables will be published in the next few weeks from the Brandon Hall Group annual learning and development LMS trends survey. Just looking from last year to this year, what you can see is that we're already sort of increasing the number of overall organizations in the market in the industry who have an LMS. 86% of organizations in our survey this year, over 400 people participated, said that they had an LMS, and we sort of balanced that against the market as a whole and looked at all the the weighting on it, and it really is pretty similar to what we're also seeing in the market as a whole. 14% say they're still looking for an LMS or don't have one, and most of them are in small and mid-market organizations. We are also seeing that more and more organizations are moving towards LMSs as enterprise-wide systems, and divisional systems are sort of taking a smaller share of this market share. And Vinay, this is something me and you talked about when we first started having this discussion, which was that because organizations are moving more and more to enterprise-wide systems, the data is becoming more important for them. Maybe do you want to kick off the conversation today talking a little bit about what you're seeing as organizations move to more enterprise-wide systems versus these divisional LMSs that we've had for many years?
Yes, so thanks, Stacey. So looking back at the past 10 years, I think it's clear gone are the days where the LMS really used to sit as a standalone system. Now the LMS has become a much more mission-critical system, which really needs to be connected into the greater IT ecosystem as such. So as a result, data from the LMS typically should be consolidated into an enterprise reporting suite or a data warehouse that can be used in conjunction with data from overall the entire enterprise systems as such. So I think there's a big difference over there.
And I think for our audience, the thing that we wanted to sort of tackle today on that same dialogue is, if you have an LMS, if you're one of that 80-something%, and probably you are at some level, we wanted to ask people here today, how happy are you with your current LMS's reporting capabilities? This is something I think that's really kicked off part of this dialogue. I'm going to launch this poll for everyone so we can get a discussion point here with the audience. Is hate too strong of a word? I know it's probably a funny way to think about it, but we hear so many people who say that their LMS current reporting capabilities, they're struggling with it. It's not doing what they really needed to do. Some they're not happy. They're not ready to throw away their LMS yet. It's sort of doing most of what they need, but not everything. Some it's doing the basic job that you need. Interested to see how many people say we're thrilled with our current LMS. And if there's something other, if you're using your LMS maybe in a different way, and so the reporting isn't sort of as important for you, we'd love to sort of hear your comments or thoughts. What does other mean? Either you're building your own reporting capabilities, you're doing it in a different system. Someone said it's a little difficult to hear, Vinay, when you were talking, so maybe just remember to talk up a little bit. We do have one of the 14% on the line here who don't have an LMS yet, but they're looking at it, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to give everyone a few more moments to sort of vote on this particular topic. But Vinay, from your perspective, do you see that a lot of organizations that you're talking to these days that reporting is on the top of their minds, and that it's something that they're struggling with, how they use it and how to get the best out of their LMS from it?
It really is, Stacey. So we see not just from RFPs that we see coming our way, but also from just understanding what the market is going through. The maturity of how organizations are actually using reporting tools still needs to grow a little bit more. And then even from an offering perspective, I think there's a lot of mention of reporting tools being made available in the marketplace, but then it actually not doing exactly what folks want it to do. So that becomes another factor to consider as well.
Well, and I think very similar to what you just said, and I think, I'm sharing our poll results, say about 70% of the audience participated. 17% said it is hate, too strong a word. They're really struggling. 31% said not happy, but not enough to throw away the LMS. 34% are saying it does the basic job I need. 12% others, be interested in hearing what some of the other challenges are. And there's about 5% who say we are thrilled. It's working the way we want it to. And move on, because I think our research on this from the LMS trends data definitely showed this out. This year when we asked organizations what are the top 3 most important new requirements, if you have decided you're going to be changing LMSs, what's the reason you are changing, and what are the new requirements that you have that you're going to? And in both cases, the reasons for changing, the number 1 issue was reporting, and the new system, what they're looking for in the new system, the number 1 issue, outstretching by far things like integration with the enterprise and ease of use, is reporting features. This is much higher than it was last year. Last year it was sort of neck and neck with ease of use, and integration issues were much bigger. Today reporting issues are number 1. Over 43% of the surveyed organizations are looking to upgrade and replace their current system. This is up from 33% in 2011. So people are struggling. They're looking at new ways to address their LMS problems. So what does that mean for us then from a learning analytics, learning data, learning reporting perspective? I think the first one thing is to understand that we have learning data in our systems. And a lot of times we think about, what is learning data? Is it just your history or your information about a course, or is it your SCORM compliant data, right? The thing that we're learning, I think, more and more every day as we start talking to organizations about what they're trying to accomplish is that learning data is any field captured at this point in time in your learning management system, and even outside your learning management systems in some cases today. It's your demographics. It's their hopes and wishes for learning and development and growth materials. It's their feedback and tests. It's their skills and performance. It's access points, locations, time on the system. Every piece of that is something that can be leveraged to help you make a better decision about what you're doing with learning. So when you're thinking about learning data, the idea is to think much bigger and broader than we probably have in the past, and profile and what you're capturing in that employee profile becomes really important. Vinay, just on this topic, have you seen this idea of sort of understanding that the data inside the system, every data, every click is becoming more important for organizations?
So that's exactly it, Stacey. So while all of these individually are really important, the real value comes up when you start combining these data points. So for example, an employee's completion records by itself is fairly valuable data. However, when you take that and really combine that with, say, geographic location or competency proficiency levels, you start seeing a lot more of what we call layered data to start making tactical learning decisions. So that really becomes helpful then.
And I think that's kind of where, just a really good example of this, this is a screenshot from just one view of sort of what type of systems data can you sort of talk about. One thing that you just talked about from a layered data perspective is the idea of sort of what browser are they coming to you from, right? You know, are they using Firefox? Are they using Internet Explorer? And what type of information, what does this type of data tell someone like you, Vinay, who's sort of working in the system and making some decisions on the learning side?
Yeah, so this is a perfect example of a kind of demographic reporting where really browsers and operating systems are just changing by the day. So reporting like this really talks through some really important information for training business owners to start understanding what their learner audiences are using to access online learning. So smart choices about then focusing testing around these browsers versus these operating systems becomes a lot more easier, especially from a content development perspective.
Yeah. We would think at this day and age that it shouldn't be an issue any longer about what browser we're using, but actually I think it's becoming even more difficult than a few years ago with the uptick in Chrome, the uptick in Firefox. All of those things are changing how things are working. That data becomes really important. And I think, as we're talking about data, I've said this before, I'll always say it again, it's my #1 pet peeve about learning and development and HR in general when it comes to data. Junk in, junk out. If you don't have a good way to capture data and you can trust that data, or if you haven't clarified that data effectively, it doesn't matter how good your analytics tool is, it doesn't matter how good your reports are, you're not going to be able to use that information. Can you just talk a little bit, have you seen that organizations oftentimes struggle with the fact that maybe it isn't that they don't have the right report or the right analytics tool, but maybe they have the wrong data in their system? Is that something you think organizations are still struggling with, Vinay?
Yeah, great point, Stacey. So we've seen several organizations line up their migration data to bring everything over, right, from their old LMS to the new LMS. And while there's a huge benefit in that, you bring the good, but you also kind of bring the bad. So having a chance to migrate data really becomes an opportunity for the organization to give their data what we call a data scrubbing and weed out all the erroneous data that could really skew an enterprise reporting system and give you just really incorrect information for you to start making decisions on. So yes, very much we see that very often with migrations.
Yeah, and junk in, junk out. I mean, my favorite one is something as simple as turnover in an organization, right? Or something as simple as I have completed a course or I've registered for a course. What does that mean in my old system versus my new system? Those type of things can mean many things across an organization versus what they mean in a new system. And whether that's something you're going to be crunching the data or looking at, you've got to understand what those definitions mean. Now, someone asked a quick question here about Tin Can API and whether we're going to be covering that today in the presentation. I think this is a good place to talk about that as we're talking about data. A lot of data comes in things like SCORM packages or wrapped up courses and material, and Tin Can API is a new way of sort of looking at data because it's more of an activity stream level. Do you want to just make a quick comment? We won't cover it in depth today, but do you want to make a quick comment on that, Vinay? Are you guys looking at taking Tin Can API as sort of a data stream coming into organizations today already?
Yeah, so yes and yes. Just for you all to know, the big thing about Tin Can API is Unlike conventional SCORM, which needs to be played within a browser, TinCan API will allow a course to be played outside a browser as well. So you could have a much more smoother experience. Now, the key thing about TinCan is the way that it reports back data. So it doesn't just necessarily have to be course progress information. You could actually collect any kind of information and report it back to the LMS. So we don't just have course completion information, but we also have, say, activity-based information. So if I wanted to go check out a particular Facebook post, that could be an activity that gets reported back to the LMS. So a lot of data coming into the LMS becomes kind of essential for you to have a robust reporting system to get that back out as well.
Yeah. So I think we won't be talking a whole much more than that about TinCan today, but we have been talking about doing a presentation on it first part of next year. It's something that's in the industry right now that is very hot as a topic. But I think no matter how you look at it, whether it's through SCORM pieces or TinCan API or any other data points, even those formats and standards require that you think about how you manage that data and if it's clean going into it. Are you capturing the right type of stuff, and are you calling it and clarifying it the right thing inside of whatever data warehousing or LMS you're going to be using? And that gets to our next point, I think, Vinay, which is what is a learning report? You know, oftentimes when we're looking at learning and we're looking at learning reports, it comes down to we ask a question, we identify a piece of data we think will answer that question, and then we pull a report. This is how learning reports tend to work. And the questions tend to be things like, how much are we spending on learning? Has someone completed their compliance training? Who went to this class? One-dimensional questions are oftentimes how we look at how we're going to use a learning report. And this is a really good example here of there may be a question about how many people are actually taking a course in a certain region or market. And so a report like this, although it's a very visual report, is still a report. It tells you how many people, I think this one is sort of in a certain region or market taking a course. Do you find, Vinay, from your experience, that organizations oftentimes look at reports as, you know, I can never quite find the right report? Is that something you hear often in your guys' business or organization?
We certainly do, and to your point, it's any item that gets recorded in the database due to any action that the user gets taken kind of becomes tangible learning data. So in effect, anything that gets rolled back into some kind of a view back for the reports administrator should be considered learning data. But at the same time, here's a perfect example with geographic reports, right? So understanding patterns into this becomes highly relevant. Any geographic report becomes all the more essential as we determine IT core issues like, all right, when is the optimal system maintenance time, especially due to time zones and international factors like that. So I think there's a crosswalk between geographic reports and learning data that once you merge together becomes really tangible data for organizations to make decisions on.
And I think that's really the next question, is that reports often in themselves may be just pieces of information, but when you start to combine reports, that's when you get some really interesting views or different perspectives. And that's really the next discussion, which is about, so we've talked about data, kind of the pieces and parts that go in. We've talked about the fact that you ask a question, out of it you get a learning report oftentimes, which is one-dimensional perspective. But then the idea of sort of combining that data is what analytics is all about. Looking at that data in a way so that you can actually put some insights and analysis into it, like you just said. Not only do I want to look at when people are taking courses so that I can understand where they're at, but also I want to look at when are they not taking courses so I can understand when I might be able to do updates that wouldn't affect them as much, right? So that's sort of putting a different level of a different view or perspective on that data or that report. So learning analytics at its heart is the analysis of connections and insights that can be gathered from comparing learning, people, and business data for the purposes of making business decisions. It is all about making business decisions. And I think that the big thing here to understand is that analytics is this idea of looking at a bunch of information, course completions, value of the content, financial improvements, engagement scores. You're not just looking at one question, one piece of information. And then that analysis and insights becomes really important. Those are the algorithms people talk about, the different type of analytical analysis that you can do inside of a system. And then the other really important element is, it's great that maybe you can create some great graph or some great chart, but if it doesn't equate to a business decision and business outcomes, then there becomes some real question as to whether there's value in doing that much analysis for everything. So, you know, on that point here, Vinay, this is a really good example of just some content data that you guys had pulled, and the difference between sort of just looking at that as data and as a report versus sort of putting that analysis on it and how you might make a different decision. Can you maybe walk through this example here?
Yeah, so here's a good example. I'm looking at this report. Kind of looks like a bit of a stock market ticker over here, but this is a good example of identifying hotspots, or what we call hotspots within the LMS. So data like this really gives us valuable information into pages that are really attractive to learners, but then more importantly, pages that are less attractive to learners, which allows us to make some pretty informed decisions about enhancing, say, navigation or increasing outreach to kind of boost up the page availability or accessibility in those weaker areas. So this is more of consolidated data that we're getting to try and understand where the learning management system needs to be beefed up in certain areas, where content needs to be made more available.
And I think that's really where that difference is that you put that analysis component, which is the bounce rates and the ups and the down ticks. So if you know it's trending up, trending down, the direction, so that you can make a better decision on that. And that's what analytics is all about. It's not just about sort of putting more reports into a system. It's about putting reports with some sort of analysis with it, which then kind of connects to where you're going from a business direction. So just to sort of take us back again, and we're taking, I know, this a little bit slow, so if you're someone who's a little bit more advanced in this topic, we realize that it'll take us a little while to get to, but we want to make sure everybody follows us on this topic, because I think as an industry, we started out the evolution of learning reports and learning from an analytics perspective primarily focused on administrators right now. What does the administrator need? What's their registration list, the completion list, the course list, the content list? This was part of the reason LMSs even came into existence originally. It was not so much the end user's perspective, it was the administrator. And with that came the idea of flat reports, and this is what most of us are used to in this process, is this idea of flat reports, because as the technology advanced, the needs met sort of the technology, and vice versa. The needs sort of drove what the technology could do. So what came out of that was something that looked like this. Example one, an administrator flat files. And Vinay, can you maybe talk a little bit, because I mean this is where we've been probably for the last 5 years in LMS, oftentimes reporting, is this idea of flat files. What sometimes are the restrictions that flat files have when it comes to reporting for organizations? What are some of the struggles people have with that?
Right. So you're right, Stacey. This takes us back probably even a little more than 5 years. And this is really what was one of the earliest definitions of a report. So for all practical purposes, this is a list. It simply states the names and then outlines completion dates for each individual. Valuable because it's extremely microscopic in nature, which means it gives you nice pinpoint information into which user has finished the course and which user has not finished the course over here. Although the problem over here occurs when it's just about 20 people on the screen, it's fine, but when you have, say, 10,000 people on the screen, that becomes a little harder to comb through. So one of the big things was these list kind of reports don't seem to work too effectively when you have large volumes of data. And that was the natural evolution, moving from stage one to probably stage two.
Which stage two, I think, really got us to now all of a sudden the learning manager, because now the administrator is not just looking for lists and being able to give some information back to a person about who completed a course. Learning managers were now looking at sort of these broader, larger dialogues, right? They wanted to understand who didn't complete of the 10,000 people that are in my company. They wanted to understand increases year over year. They wanted to look at gaps in program tests so they could get learning decisions out of that. They wanted to look at survey rates and registration rates. And so the learning manager became a pretty central component of what drove reporting in LMSs then after kind of stage two. And that sort of drove us to sort of something that we all sort of are comfortable with, is this idea of exporting reports, right? So here you have exportable data that goes into an Excel spreadsheet, or it goes into something that's a little bit more usable in some other format. And there's an example here, I think, of one where someone can take this data and export it. From your experience, Vinay, I mean, this is something that almost any report should be able to do today, is export it into another system, some format. What do you find most organizations do once they export it, though? Do you find that they're doing something different than what the system should be doing, or are the systems now catching up to that?
Yeah, so the big advantage is once you take it into a native file format like an Excel file or something like that, you have the ability to slice and dice the data, sort it, give it a lot more dimension, be able to group it together, be able to separate it out. So this, and really this report over here, this screenshot that you've got over here, this is a perfect example of the volume of data when it starts expanding dramatically, we start seeing things like being able to sort it in the report directly. And most importantly, like you said, to bring the report into a third-party external tool, not just an Excel document, but maybe a PDF that needs to be sent out, but then bringing it into Excel and then generating charts, generating some kind of data value over there apart from just the flat data that's presented over there.
Yeah. And I think that is an absolute necessary sort of next step that we had. I think most systems can do that today, not all of them though, and it's a big part of, if you're looking at reporting and you're looking at what you need to do, organizations have to at least think through that idea of exporting, and they have to think through the idea of how they can sort and dice that information even on the screen. And I think that became even clearer with stage 3, which was personal reports. Now all of a sudden the LMS became very centered on the learner and what the learner was looking for, which meant you had to get down to granular levels with these reports, which means you had to look at things like my personal training record, my personal training gaps, my competencies, and matching my competencies with other things that were in the system. So it had to do a lot more complex analysis. And this is where we started to see things like dashboards and dynamic tools come out. Can you talk a little bit about the dashboards from your perspective? I mean, what's working and what's not working in dashboards today, Vinay? I mean, are these things that you're seeing organizations are figuring out how to leverage more appropriately in the organizations?
Yes, and Stacey, you hit upon this a couple of slides back as well, but really with compliance training becoming one of the big reasons to invest in an LMS, the ability to get views into or get a perspective into completed data is not just enough. But really what we're talking about is what we call is exception data. So which means that we want to get insight into people who have not completed their courses. So this is where we have managers' dashboards that have the ability to break down a chart and say, here is the list of folks that have completed, here are the list of folks who have not completed through a visual representation. But then where companies kind of hold back or don't succeed further is when you really need to be able to click through those charts and get a drill down list of information that backs up that chart. So the data that actually powers that chart. So in the chart over here, if, for example, if I wanted to click on the green area, it should be able to give me a list of all the incomplete users behind that. So the visual representation is nice, but really what really powers it is the data that gets backed up, and the ability to drill down becomes really essential over there.
And that dynamic view, I think, is what organizations start to realize, is that no matter how many charts or no many times they showed it in a pretty view, if it wasn't dynamic, it wasn't adding a lot of value, particularly for the end users, but definitely for line managers. And that would probably be the next stage. And this is the stage where most organizations are somewhere in right now, is this idea of sort of, I can get my flat reports, I can export reports when I need to, I have some dashboards, I should have some dynamic tools that I'm able to use. Every one of these are still important for the various audiences who need them, but today now we're starting to see much more dynamic tools that are allowing people to drill in deeply, to change views when they need to, and this is in response to not only learners but line managers saying, look, I have got to understand my team's learning gaps, and I need to understand when something is showing up red, what does that mean? How can I drill into it? I need to understand my team's compliance, my domain reports, my comparison reports. And a lot more, this looks a lot more like what we're starting to see come out in the market here, are these type of dashboard widgets that people can sort of look at and change around. Can you maybe talk through a little bit of that idea of dynamic dashboards versus sort of standard dashboards? Is there any additional things you think people should sort of be aware of when they're thinking about dynamic dashboards, Vinay?
Yes, certainly, Stacey. So back in the day, about 3 to 5 years back, we really started seeing data explode, right? The volume of data just grew exponentially. So what happened was a lot of organizations started having to summarize all this data into visual representations. And the problem with that was these visual representations really weren't being updated on a dynamic basis, which means that they'd probably run once a night and they'd give you 24-hour late information. And what's happened now is you're seeing learning management systems actually tap into live data. So these dashboards are really meant for the line manager that would allow them to get a quick glimpse into the training health of their department. And this is, of course, in conjunction with making the raw data available as well, so that they can dig deeper as well.
And then I think what we're seeing today is that it's this idea of now line managers, learners, learning managers, administrators. You think about all the things that all this data now is kind of adding up, right? As you said, it's growing and growing. So now we're looking at how can we analyze that data and how can we big data visualize that data. And this is where businesses are saying, look, I don't just want to understand compliance gaps. I need to understand what is going to improve my performance? Which things took place? What correlated with improved performance in one area, and how might that correlate with another area? I need to understand improved time to productivity. So why does one line able to get their people trained faster than another line? What's the differences between those two lines? I need to understand audit support reports, right? I need to know if I am going to have compliance gaps, what could that cost me from a risk perspective, from a fee perspective, or is it something that we're able to live with for a little while we're trying to get other things fixed in the organization? Those are all real business discussions that take place on a day-to-day basis, and this is why analytics and big data visualization has become so important. So maybe if you can kind of talk through this idea of an analytics tool. What's the biggest difference between, say, all the things we just talked about, reports, flat files, dynamic drillable tools, dashboards? What's the difference between those things and an analytics tool from your perspective?
Yes, so close to about 2 to 3 years ago, we started offering not just static reports that could sort on export to Excel and PDF. We started seeing a need for something more. And we really wanted to solve a greater problem that we were seeing in the industry, which was allowing report administrators to be able to kind of shape the data into the report, shape the data in the report into a specific consumable format best optimized for their organization. So being able to create things like crosstabs or filtering and grouping of data all becomes very valid tools to dissect the data into the best format for their report audiences. And really, why take this into Excel? You should be able to do it right there on the LMS for those reports, and then save a view for the next administrator to come in and actually take a look at that same report. So that was one of the fundamental reasons behind introducing a set of analytic tools which allow you to take flat data and then slice and dice them in different ways directly on the report rather than having users take that back into Excel.
And I think for a lot of people, that's the big thing, is that if you're really looking at something that's going to be an analytics tool, it has to allow you to put in place not only some good filters, not only some good tools you would see in things like more higher level analytics tools, but it's also going to allow you to leverage all that data you've just been talking about, right? All the flat files, all the material, all the different types of clicks and data points that you've been gathering in an organization. So is this sort of where you guys have sort of moved to more of these dynamic report tools? And so it's great to be able to analyze it, but now I've got to get it out of there and give it to somebody or make sure that people can see it or run that report on a regular basis. Is that where that comes in place, Vinay?
It does, and this screen is representative of where we've taken this one step further. So in addition to developing canned reports out of the box for our customers, we really want to take this to such a high level where we could actually give our customers the whole data model. And what that means is really allow administrators to do true ad hoc reporting by offering them a sandbox consisting of nearly every field in the database and allowing them to custom create their own reports without writing a single line of code. And this really is where reporting is right now. So apart from picking the fields that you want, so if you look at the screen over here, there's a whole bunch of fields over there. Picking the fields that you want, you should be able to insert charts, change the names of those header columns, align things as you see fit, determine, say, what order of fields should be presented, and several other configuration items like this. And really what this does is allow an organization to tailor their reports to a point of being personalized toward their training requirements rather than have a one-size-that-fits-all model.
And I think that, you know, and then the piece about this that's so exciting, I think, for a lot of organizations is that so you can sort of customize that, look at it differently, analyze the data in different ways, and then you can actually create dashboards in some of these systems and tools. And I think this is where the piece that I'm so excited, because guess what? My line manager doesn't want to look at an Excel spreadsheet. They don't want to look at a big piece of information. They want you to tell me, to give you some of that analysis, to tell you what's important, so that they can zero in on the things that will help them make big business decisions. So can you talk a little bit about this dynamic dashboarding capability? Is that something that also sort of is the idea of sort of merging that analytics as well as sort of the reporting capability?
That's exactly it. So what we wanted to do was have the ability for you to have in a single report the ability to look at a high-level dashboard, which could consist of a pie chart, it could consist of a scatter diagram. But then once you have that scatter diagram, then you have the ability to actually drill down and look at that data behind it on that same report. And then you can actually take that report and distribute it directly from this tool to your a personalized distribution list. So let's say you have a distribution list of line managers available to look at this report. You can not just manually email them, but you can actually create a scheduled report that runs every night and automatically distributes these reports so that it shows up in their inbox first thing in the morning to take a look at compliance training data.
And I think these are all great tools, and I think there's a great question on the side here that leads to sort of the next topic, because this is fascinating, the fact that we can do this today, that we've evolved over the last 5 to 6 years to really, I think, enhance how we think about data in the learning space and in the HR space. But someone asked a great question, you know, in analytics, how do you separate the quantity of data to intelligent business relevant information? Numbers are not equal to causality. That's a perfect, because we do this all the time in research, is that just because there's a relationship does not mean that one caused the other. And that's a really important thing, because one of the challenges organizations struggle with is that they do some great stuff, but again, that junk in, junk out, the data that's coming in may not be the right data coming out, or when the people get the information in front of them, they don't know what to do with that. And I think this next chart, this heat maps that you're talking about here, can you maybe talk through how you guys are helping organizations sort of visualize the important data, make important decisions, so that the big data does not mean, just because there's a lot of it, that it's the right business decision. Can you talk a little bit about that, Vinay, and maybe how you've looked at visualizing it to help?
Yes, certainly. So sure enough, we're in what we call the big data era. So the sheer volume of data is now getting to almost a staggering point where business owners now need large-scale representations of being able to sweep through that data quickly and efficiently. So here's a perfect example. One of our customers has 500,000 employees across 4 continents and really wants to be able to get an idea on how healthy they are from a compliance training standpoint. So what we did is make something available that we call heat maps. So if you look at the screen over here, if you look at that slider at the bottom, I can actually use that slider at the bottom to determine how compliant I want to set my baseline at, and then automatically each region changes color, denoting a certain level of compliance depending on that baseline. So if I set my baseline to 50% compliance, I can kind of quickly zoom into the hottest areas in red and focus my attention there while skipping the areas in green. So tools like this really become so essential when you're dealing with large enterprise organizations with huge volumes of data, for them to quickly scan things over and start making decisions based on what they're seeing.
And I think that's the really important component there to that question, which is that if you didn't have that slider bar at the bottom, if you weren't able to sort of say 50% versus 75%, if the report just said everyone in red isn't 100% compliant, you don't have that business insight to realize that red doesn't mean bad, because we don't maybe need 100% compliant in a certain area or market. Maybe 50% is good enough, right?
Yep.
And that, I think, is when we talk about where organizations are heading with this, is this idea to put business insight into that big data dialogue. You have to have that business insight, which means that people are never going to come out of this equation. So maybe you can talk a little bit, Vinay, about, because it's people that have to give that business insight, how does something like a reporting development analytics tool like this help include that people component into that perspective?
Yep, and so this kind of relates back to the question that was asked as well. So it was really a good question, because reporting has to consist of 2 components, primarily a quantitative analysis and a qualitative analysis of that data. So, and one of the things that reporting has conventionally been looked at was to look backward and take a look at performance that has happened in the past. But what we need to be able to get to is a point where you can actually forecast forward using what we call business decision modeling. So one of the components that we've got is something that we call IDVs, or interactive data views, where we literally create a mini console for the reports administrator, which allows them to perform basic statistical analysis like determining the mean, mode, standard deviation, normalization, and then use those data points to create something as complex as a regression analysis, seasonality-related trending, and other such models that actually trend forward. And that is where we want to take reporting moving forward, is for a learning manager to be able to present to their senior management some projections, not just past performance.
And I think that's the real, and because those projections, you have to have the business insight into them. You have to know that your data's clean. You have to know that because a manager left one region, that might be why the numbers are down versus the actual training in that area. And that's what a person does, is that they're able to sort of build this. That's why sometimes those sort of just simply purely out of the box analytics are great, and they do a lot of really good, interesting things for organizations, but if they don't allow you to make adjustments for that data, for the things that you know as a business that's, as Erin said, that's that's both quantitative and qualitative that you need to adjust, that's where it's really important to have that kind of flexibility. And I think, what we're seeing is that over time, this is a dialogue in progress, right? If you look at this evolution of learning reports from the beginning to end, we've just hit this idea of big data visualizing and analytics in just the last few years. There are organizations in our companies that are farther along than we are by far. Your marketing department, your finance department, they've been doing this type of analytics for much longer than the HR and the learning organizations have. But I think part of the reason it's taken learning and HR a little bit longer to get there is that we're dealing with people, and people don't always do what you think they're going to do, right? They're not like boxes. They're not like finance numbers that are going to go up one way or down another because you've predicted it. Vinay, can you talk a little bit about that, sort of the challenge that learning in HR has and why it's a valid challenge, and where you think we can sort of help organizations through those discussions?
Right, and the biggest challenge is how to actually relate return on investment numbers associated with something like training. So training being such a qualitative act, really being able to associate real returns, and that becomes a challenge. And there are multiple ways to do that, but learning organizations primarily needs to be able to get back data that would say, hey, you know what, we made X amount of impact on this person's performance, or we made X amount of impact that saved us Y amount of dollars. And the real way to do that is by taking the information that's presented to you, not just the raw data in the LMS, combining it together, performing a certain amount of analytics, and then be able to roll that into a greater financial report or a greater labor report or a greater human capital management report as such. So that's the one thing that I would recommend to organizations, especially learning organizations out there, is sometimes there may not be ROI values immediately available from your learning management system, but what needs to be done is a certain factoring of data that comes out of the learning management system in conjunction with the data that you have about the training effort as such, which is where you'll actually get to ROI data or some other tangible data that you can report on.
Yeah, I think my favorite term when it comes to analytics and work, because I've been working in this industry for quite some time on the research side, is common sense goes a long way. And I think a lot of times we're trying to find that perfect number, that perfect metric that's going to get us the business case. And I think our business leaders are very, very willing to look at what data we're showing them, and as long as we can explain the story, analytics is 50% storytelling and 50% data crunching, right? And the storytelling part is as important as the data crunching part. Someone asked a great question here. To do this type of forecasting, do you need highly skilled statisticians? I would say I wouldn't try and attempt it without someone who at least understands statistics and the equations and the algorithms a little bit. But I don't know that you have to have highly trained. I think that what we're finding with a lot of these tools is they're allowing people to leverage some of their experience and their background, and the tools are helping them make those leaps. A really good example here, we asked people about the top ways to gauge effective learning today. 54% of them are still saying that it's learner satisfaction, right? 52%, sorry, are still saying it's learner satisfaction reports that are helping them engage effective learning today. 54% are saying demonstration of skills and knowledge. That's really great. Tests are doing. And, there's still about 46% saying it's business performance, what Vinay was talking about. I think the biggest thing is that we need to make baby steps forward in this. This isn't a done deal. There's a lot to be talked about in this market. And just to sort of maybe go on to the next topic around this, I want to ask our next poll question, which is about what answers would be most valuable for you as a learning organization. And I'm going to launch this. Is it the impact of training has on my compliance incidents? So this is just you, that you may need to do all these, but what's most valuable today? If you could answer this, it would make your business happier. What should be priority learning on a limited budget right now? What are the demographics of my learning population? Or does my learning have return on investment like Vinay talked about, or other? If there's something else that we haven't mentioned here that's most valuable to you from your learning data analysis, let us know, because I think this is really the most important question. How do I take common sense? How do I take baby steps? And which things are going to give me the most value for my organization right now? We'll give a few minutes for people to answer that. While we're doing that, maybe Vinay, you can answer from your perspective. Do you think you need a statistician for this, the highly skilled statistician, to do what you just talked about, at least on the highest level there?
Yes, that's a good question, Stacey. There's a spectrum of complexity that's involved with any kind of statistical analysis. So when you're doing complex models looking forward, yes, it would certainly help if you had a statistician on board. But when you're doing something a little more basic, like you're trying to calculate, say, how confident are you of this training data, or how confident are you of being able to make a marked improvement on, say, a certain area that you're trying to develop. The basic statistical analysis, and it really depends on how comfortable you are with statistics. That'll give you a 95% confidence interval on things. That could be actually handled by a reports administrator, provided they have the tools available to actually knock through those things. So, and that's where a learning management system comes in. Is the aim should be to provide you with the tools to pull together a basic analysis with the full understanding that once you start going past that spectrum into more of a complex statistical analysis, that you need some additional tools, maybe not even tools, but a greater understanding to try and decipher what that analysis means. And that's really our stand on complex statistic reporting as such.
Perfect. And I think, we have a couple other questions on that, but, just to share the poll findings here, does my learning have a return on investment? Obviously, number one, we knew that was a big issue. Number two is what should be the priority learning on a limited budget. Number three was the impact of training has on compliance, and then some demographics information. 12 on other. We had some interesting insights here about, does my learning program enhance the ability of the organization to achieve its strategic goals? What's most valuable, from a learning content perspective? All of those are important perspectives. We're going to hide this here real quick. And we're going to go on because I think these case studies will help people sort of understand. You've got two great case studies here, Vinay. One is talking about this organization that's in the public sector who did exactly, sort of answered some of these questions for themselves.
Yeah. So this was a really interesting case just a couple of years back, but this was a large federal government agency that was trying to solve a fundamental problem that probably applies to all of corporate America, which was, I've got a limited set of training dollars. How can I go about prioritizing where I spend those training dollars effectively? And this is the fundamental challenge for any learning organization out there. So part of the challenges over here was there was huge potential gaps in the workforce coming up as the baby boomer generation was getting ready to retire, and a new generation of workforce comes in over there, and they really had to ramp them up for the gaps that were being created within the organization. So what they needed was really accelerated insight into being able to come up with a training plan to say, all right, let's bring the new workforce up to speed as quickly as possible in these areas which are core areas of improvement. Now, what they didn't have was what those core areas were. And that really became a big effort for them to identify that. So what they wanted to do was they started backwards. They said, let's identify all the skills that we need in order for these folks to perform their jobs effectively. Then let's take those skills and let's line them up against competencies that we believe would allow them to be proficient at those skills. And then what we should do is kind of measure them to see what kind of skills gaps exist. So they did a combination of, once again, qualitative, quantitative assessments that allowed their workforce to respond, and what they ended up with was a series of skills gaps. And what the senior management of this agency required is, they've got a distributed audience all across the country, and they really wanted to be able to slice and dice this down to say, show me the skills gaps on the West Coast, using that as an example, versus the skills gap on the East Coast, and then show me the skills gaps between junior workforce members coming straight into the workforce versus somebody who's been around for about 10 years. And really what they wanted is, at the end of the day, precision point areas that allowed them to say, this is where I'm going to spend my limited training budget. So what they did was they not just developed a skills gap analysis, but they also got what we call, once again, standard deviation data that allowed them to say with 95% confidence that here's the interval between where the training data lies. So it becomes a fairly healthy understanding of where their training issues, where the skills gaps are. Then what we obviously had to do for them was come up with a reporting engine that could take that data, sort it through multiple criteria, and provide them with data to allow them to do forecasting and trending forward, like we mentioned earlier. And that really was the highlight of the entire product as such, was for them to be able to say, all right, with my limited set of dollars in 2011 or 2010, I'm going to go ahead and prioritize these dollars in these areas because of these factors we've evaluated here in this area. in this geographic area, we have skills deficiencies in this area. This is where we need to prioritize. So this became a very holistic way for them to address how they wanted to prioritize their limited training dollars.
And to just put another perspective on that, I think this idea of, yeah, you could have done this maybe without the analytics component of it. But I think what was really important is that, as you said, that standard deviation, they figured out that statistically that this was the right range. It wasn't just anomalies, outliers that were throwing it off. And the reason I think that is so important, I mean, to just give a real-world example of what we just went through, no matter who you voted for in the election environment, you probably heard Nate Silver's name as sort of doing all the analytics work from baseball and turning that into work that was being done on the election metrics. And statistics actually do help you get much closer to the answer and make sure that you aren't looking at outliers, or you're not looking at the squeaky wheel, or you're not looking at sort of differences that are not being averaged by regions or market. Did I explain that correctly, Vinay, from your perspective?
Yes, so that's exactly. In fact, that's a good example for them to be able to. I think that's a good case that actually strengthens the need for statistical analysis and the ability to project forward. And that was a perfect example, especially with the election results actually showing to be 100% as what he had predicted.
Yep, exactly. And I think, when you think about that from the next piece, which is compliance, now when you really think about what happens in compliance, organizations lose thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year because of bad audits, lack of compliance, missing things when it comes to compliance issues. So can you talk a little bit about compliance and maybe predicting forward and how that can be helpful for an organization?
Certainly. So compliance is one of the primary reasons why people invest in an LMS. It becomes a critical component for how they achieve their overall compliance goals. So there's really two parts of compliance. One is being compliant by the actions that you do, but then the first part actually is the responsibility of the organization to make sure that an employee gets the compliance training that they need so that they're able to maintain that compliance. And both need check marks as far as any organization that's regulated, any organization that has to deal with public record, any organization that has to deal with any large enterprise organization that plays in the public space would have that kind of a requirement. So really the scope of this is, why is this so important? Why is compliance reporting so important? So they need up-to-the-minute reporting on compliance data so that their organization can meet the standards set by whichever regulatory bodies are out there. And at any point in time, they could be called out saying, show me your compliance data for this, and they'd have to present a report. So like I said, this is so there are a couple of customers that we have that are large customers that use compliance reporting, our compliance reporting module, a compliance tool as such, and it becomes really critical for them the real reason over here is compliance organizations should be able to prove at any point in time that they should still have an authority to operate. And the only way they can do this is by dipping into the LMS, bringing back the data saying, hey, our employees are all trained effectively, and then be able to, some organizations are actually expected to hold compliance training data for several years, and what better platform to hold it in than the learning management system, so that they can show a year-over-year comparison to say, hey, I was this compliant in 2006 and now I'm this compliant in 2010, and as a result, see where we've reached as well.
Well, and I think the bigger dialogue around compliance also gets into, Vinay, as you sort of mentioned, is that ability to dynamic and drill in and drill down and be able to see information at a granular level becomes really important when you're at things like a nuclear plant, where maybe you've got to log in or log out of an organization, and that type of training actually gets you access to a site. And if you just took that training this morning, those are things where that to-the-minute requirements are important, as well as sort of understanding how long it might take for someone to get trained or up to speed. Those type of things are important as well on the compliance level. We talked a lot about the larger theories. We've looked at the whole evolution of reporting and analytics. We really wanted to get down to sort of helping people understand how they could think about analytics for their organization. A couple of quick things to sort of wrap up the call, and we know we have a lot of questions and we'll definitely stay on for some of the questions, was to just think about some of the pitfalls that you can avoid and some of the challenges that you want to maybe address ahead on before you start thinking about analytics and reporting within your organization. One is educate and train administrators and managers on your reporting capability tools. The worst thing in the world that we see is organizations who buy their LMS systems with all these capabilities and they don't appropriately train anyone on how to use them effectively in the organization. A lot of time and energy sort of picking the right tool and not training people how to use them. The other one is clearly defining data input requirements. A rose is a rose is a rose, right? By any other name, it smells as sweet, not in HR, I say, because if you do not call someone, if an intern is not the same in one organization versus another organization, or if requirements around registration are not the same from one area to the other, or things as simple as codes for employees are not the same in one area for another, that data is really skewed then as to what you're getting back from the organization. Create a self-serve segmentation view and drill downs. We talked a lot about that, how important that is. Ensure reporting use cases are part of an LMS selection upgrade process. One of the worst things I see organizations do on the flip side is that they don't actually use those use cases, ask LMS providers to look at their data, input their data into the systems. Ensure reports and data views are user-friendly and provide opportunities to share data for further analysis and insights. We talked about those from a dashboard perspective, and understand the nuances and opportunities in data warehousing. So Vinay, maybe you can sort of add a couple comments to this about sort of what you've seen organizations who maybe haven't followed these pitfalls, particularly data warehousing questions, because we've had a few questions about that here from a wrap-up perspective today.
Yeah, so data warehousing really is the way of the unified IT ecosystem, right? So it's not about just pulling data from the LMS as such, it's about pulling data from all the other enterprise components or all the other enterprise software components that exist out there. Data warehousing becomes really critical because you should have the ability to pull into that entire network of systems and get back a consolidated set of data, either on a nightly basis, which means that it's not real-time, or on a real-time basis. A real-time basis, it becomes a little bit of a challenge just because of the overhead of it constantly accessing these systems. So it becomes an expensive affair. No doubt, though, it is extremely relevant, especially for a compliance organization that could use this up-to-the-date data reporting over here. One of the big challenges that we've seen also is for administrators to truly understand the power of schedule reports, and do we need to run all the reports live all the time? So does it make sense for me to run a report live on the system that consists of, say, 3 million records? And is that the best way for us to address a reporting problem? Because what you're really doing is actually, if your LMS is going to be housing this data, you shouldn't be running such a large report against the LMS. So what you want to do is use the power of scheduled reports where it can work at off times or low activity times to run those kind of powerful reports and actually generate them and keep them available for you all. So that becomes another challenge to run into as well. But otherwise, no, I think you covered it well, Stacey.
Thanks so much, Vinay. It seems Stacey's lost audio for a second. Did you have any
I
other?
apologize. Sorry,
You're back.
I'm back. Apologize for that, guys. I had a slip in my internet access. I was just actually wrapping up and summarizing. Thank you, Aaron. I know we're at the top of the hour, but Vinay, can you stay on for a few moments to take some questions from the audience?
Sure.
Okay. We had some great questions here, and I'm going to take a few moments. We had a lot of questions about ROI and a lot of comments about the fact that maybe ROI isn't true ROI, but it is more about sort of, I think people have said here, more about L&D function demonstrating the contribution to the organization. Can you maybe talk about how you've worked with any organizations who have who have answered that question in a different way, Vinay, by any chance?
Yeah, so the easiest way, and this is the fundamental, probably the shortest drive to being able to generate some kind of ROI data. The entire concept behind ROI is to be able to show quantitatively how you've made an impact into the organization. So it could be from a dollars perspective, it could be through some other numerical concepts over there. So what most organizations, the easiest way to do this is to assess an individual, send them for training, and then reassess them. So if I have, let's say, if I'm supposed to be a project manager, I should be able to assess, get a certain score on project management, and then by going through a training program, I should be given that same assessment again, obviously with different questions, and then see where my score stands. And that immediately shows a marked improvement from a performance output perspective, saying, yes, the skills or the knowledge of this individual has now increased. So there is a direct quantitative correlation over there to say that this person is now capable of performing more. The next way of determining ROI is using Kirkpatrick level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on where you are in the organization, using those kind of surveys to actually keep pinging out to your employees and saying, hey, post-training, are you able to do your job better? What was the average time for you to perform a task that you just went through training on? And then keep sending these surveys out. Those surveys get to be a little heavy just because of the constant surveying that needs to be done over there. So it's something for a really large organization, if they have the ability to do that with their employees, and the employee's job profile actually consists of it being conducive to accept those surveys, then yes, then that becomes another area. So ROI is there's just so much that you can talk about ROI. If you go to Google and type on ROI on learning, and you'll see a whole bunch of links over there as well. But these were the two immediate concepts that came to mind that I wanted to share with all of you.
Definitely, and I think someone made a good comment here, and I just want to share it with everybody. Someone who came from the finance group on this side, and they came into L&D late, and they said, we may have actually done ourselves a lot of disservice by trying to always get ROI in learning, because as he says, and this is very true, ROI for finances and for most other organizations is used as a pre-investment dialogue, less than a post-investment dialogue. And I think we're always looking at it as a post in the past, and that's what you were saying, Vinay. If you really want to do ROI that I think is going to be effective in many cases, those predictive analytics are a really big part of that, because you can then start talking about what that investment should get for you, and then you can go back and see if you got that investment. That's a much better way to do ROI. So very good comment from someone on the side. We also had a good question here about the idea of the analytics system being a submodule of an ERP. I think it's a great question to ask. Can you maybe answer that a little bit, Vinay, from your perspective? Can you, is it important to do this here, and do you have to have an ERP to do this kind of work?
So yes and no, if I remember the order of the questions, but let me go back to answering them. So I think it's absolutely essential, firstly, for any ERP system to have its own analytics module. I think most ERP systems come with an analytics module, and if they don't, I think that's a fundamental problem with the ERP system as such. Two, does it need to happen here instead of the ERP system? It really depends. It really depends on how structured the entire organization is into correlating all these different components into the ERP system. Certainly, the ERP system becomes the fundamental baseline of an enterprise software system within the organization, and it would be nice for it to contain all data within that ERP system. But there may be cases, and once again, this is where I was going back to the original point of really a data warehouse sitting in the middle, collecting information from all these services. Is what is the requirement for looking at this kind of reporting? So there could be different degrees of those requirements. So one could be purely the L&D organization or the training organization saying, hey, I just want data about my training. And then once the ERP folks get involved, you have the ability to do a lot more by taking that training data and combining with several other factors over there. So it really depends on who the audience is over here. And I would say I think there could be an equal case made for having this reporting stored on the LMS, as well as an equal case for having this data stored on the ERP as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, but one of the things I said early on in my career is that it was surprising, but the LMS seemed to be the one system that might touch everybody. For a lot of organizations, the ERP may not be the same across an organization, especially those who might have mergers and acquisitions. And the LMS is oftentimes the one piece that anyone who has to take sort of onboarding and compliance has to touch. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the LMS to do this type of analytics, and oftentimes it requires less high level of statistics skills in some cases, because those are definitely things that are required in an ERP environment. We did have some good questions about thoughts on how to measure engagement. I know that isn't particular in this overall topic, but Vinay, did you maybe have a couple of comments on how you've seen organizations in their LMS thinking about engagement metrics, and have you seen some of those data points used with the learning metrics for organizations?
Yes, certainly. So engagement, adoption, all these are big factors over here, and currently there's a current buzz term out there which is gaining a lot of traction called gamification, and I'm sure we've all heard of this. But the real reason behind introducing gamification is to try and increase engagement, is to try and increase adoption. It's the concept of being able to publicly display how well one person is doing in training versus how well another person is doing training. And there's a whole philosophical conversation that can be had about this. But where organizations go is engagement and adoption. There has to be tied in with some kind of reward system. And really, what most folks are doing is trying to create some kind of basic reward system to encourage people to take not just the required training. Well, there's typically no reward for that, but more reward someone for being able to take elective training or optional training as well. And that creates a couple of ripple effects within the engagement and adoption areas for users. I hope that answered your question. I think we may have lost Stacey again.
Sorry, guys, I'm here. It's going back in and out. But hopefully today we've answered some great questions. We're going to wrap up at this point, but I know there's a few questions that haven't been answered. So for those of you who did ask questions on the side or we weren't able to get to you, we will answer those following the event. Some of those answers we'll try and get from the team, Vinay and his team. Some of them will come from the Brandon Hall group. But for everyone else, I do want to say thank you for staying on. I know many of you stayed on past the hour. As always, please send your comments through our evaluation program. That helps us understand how we can improve, how we can make things better for everyone who is on the webinar. Vinay, I want to say thank you to you. Your wealth of knowledge is amazing in this space. I want to say thank you to Meridian for their sponsoring the event. We would not be able to put on these events without the solution providers helping us sponsor them so we can do educational events like this. Vinay, any last minute comments for the audience about things they should think about when it comes to analytics and learning and how all this ties together?
The only thing I would add, Stacey, and first of all, thank you for having me. This was fun and it was a pleasure. But the only thing I would say is we constantly seem to chase the analytic capability that we don't have currently today, and that may not be necessarily the best approach. The more advanced you get with analytics, the way this is constructed is you typically want to keep advancing. So I think it's time. It's highly relevant for organizations to be able to look at what they have right now and be able to report with the analytics that they have, just understanding what landscape is out there in the entire analytics space. And I think that was really the purpose of this this entire presentation. So hopefully it was helpful.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think we got some great comments already on the side. Let me know if you have any additional questions for anyone else following the event. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Connect with us through email if you have follow-up questions. But Vinay, again, thank you for your time. I know you weren't feeling well today, so you did an amazing job capturing everything. Thanks to all of our question answers. Thank you, Aaron, for your introductions. And let me wrap everything up today, and hopefully wherever you're at, you'll have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.